Margaret picked my wedding dress. Lace I didn't like. A neckline, she said, hid my broad shoulders. Evan, my fiancé, just laughed. "You know how she is," he said, adjusting his cufflinks like he didn't see my face fall. I had dreamt of a satin A-line since I was 15. But every fitting became a war, and he always waved the white flag on her behalf. The guest list, the ceremony time, the menu, every choice passed through Margaret first. "This is how we do things in our family," she'd say. Her family, not mine. Still, I bit my tongue. I told myself Evan loved me, that once the wedding passed, things would calm down. But they didn't. After the vows, Margaret moved into our house temporarily. 3 months later, she was still in the guest room, reorganizing my kitchen drawers and telling me which lotion was too strong for Evan's allergies. He never spoke up. When she told me I should stop wearing red lipstick, he shrugged and said, "She's just trying to help." I wasn't a wife. I was a guest in my own life. And the more I stayed quiet, the more invisible I became, until I couldn't breathe. On our first anniversary, I tried to reclaim myself. I wore the red lipstick. I booked us a table at the restaurant Evan used to say he loved when we were dating. He arrived 20 minutes late, frowning. "You didn't tell Mom where we were going." I blinked. She wasn't invited. He scoffed. "That's not how our family works." I waited, for him to laugh, say he was kidding. He didn't. He spent the dinner distracted, texting. When dessert came, I tried again. "Evan, I love you, but I can't do this anymore. I need you to have my back, just once." He looked at me like I'd asked for something absurd. "You're too sensitive." "She's just traditional." My throat tightened. I realized in that moment, he was never going to change. He didn't just tolerate her control. He believed in it. That night, I lay awake while Margaret's voice echoed from the kitchen, scolding the housekeeper for using the wrong sponge. I turned to face the wall and whispered into the dark, "If I could do it over again, I wouldn't marry you." My chest ached, my fingers numb. Somewhere between silence and surrender, sleep took me. And when I woke up, my phone buzzed. Day before the wedding. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The same group chat notification popped up. Bridesmaids fitting at noon. I sat up, blinking at the sun pouring in. My dress, the one Margaret chose, still hung on the door, untouched. The date on my phone was the same day I remembered folding into myself in the boutique's dressing room while Margaret said, "This neckline flatters your lack of curves." But this time I didn't cry. I stood, stretched, looked in the mirror, and whispered, "Okay." I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I smiled. I had been given a gift, not just of time, but of clarity. I wasn't going to run. I was going to walk calmly, gracefully, and with the sharpest smile she'd ever seen. This time, I would play along until it no longer served me. Then I'd stop, not with a scene, with precision. Margaret thought I was soft. Evan thought I was passive. Neither of them had ever met the woman who'd been buried under their expectations. Now, she was wide awake. And she'd never wear their names again. I arrived at the boutique right on time, smiling like a bride-to-be. Margaret was already there, holding a clipboard, telling the tailor to add more padding to the bust. She's always been flat. "Up top," she said loudly. I didn't flinch. I simply walked over, greeted her with a kiss on the cheek, and said, "Thanks for taking charge." She blinked, suspicious. I added, "Today's about making you proud, isn't it?" She beamed. "See, Evan? She's finally understanding." Evan looked at me like he was trying to decode something. Good. Let him wonder. I tried the dress. On stood on the pedestal, and let her critique me like before. But this time I looked straight into the mirror, not at the dress, but at her reflection behind me. She was a woman so desperate to control others because her own life was so small. And this time, I didn't hate her. I pitied her. When she stepped out to take a call, I snapped a selfie in the dress, then messaged a tailor I found weeks ago, asking if my dream gown was still possible on short notice. He replied instantly, "Yes, meet me tomorrow." I smiled. One thread was already unraveling. Later that afternoon, I called my old mentor, Rachel. She hadn't heard from me in nearly a year. I had ghosted everyone who knew me before Margaret's grip took hold. "I didn't think I'd ever hear from you again," she said. I told her I was getting married, but I wanted to talk about job openings. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I will be." She emailed me within an hour. 3 opportunities, all flexible, all remote. I applied with a new resume, this time listing every skill Margaret once mocked. "You're too intense," she used to say. "No man wants to marry a competitor." Now I was reclaiming every ambition she made me feel ashamed of. That night, I pulled out my financial documents. Dowry terms, joint accounts, title changes. Margaret had insisted on just in case Evan ever got sick. I started taking photos, creating backups. I wasn't going to cancel the wedding yet. First, I needed every signature, every lie, every moment of forced silence preserved. I was no longer documenting pain. I was building proof, not for court, for myself, to never again let anyone convince me that silence was strength. Strength was what came next. By morning, I had a plan, but I didn't rush it. I needed them both to believe I was still that same quiet, pliable girl who just wanted peace. So when Margaret knocked on my door with wedding tea and advice about pleasing a man's family, I smiled, nodded, and thanked her for her wisdom. I even let her repin my hair and critique my posture. Evan popped in with his usual, "Just go with it, babe. You know she means well." I kissed his cheek. Of course. I let them talk over me, plan without me, dominate every detail, because I wanted them comfortable. Comfortable people don't see betrayal coming. I made small talk with her about seating arrangements while mentally rewriting my own life. Every time she crossed a line, telling me I looked tired, warning me not to wear heels because Evan hated towering women, I noted it down, calm and meticulous. Meanwhile, I'd received a response from Rachel, a remote strategy consultant, role with flexible pay and full independence. I accepted, quietly, no announcements, just action. That day, I wasn't wearing the red lipstick, but I was painting something far bolder beneath the surface. I was designing an exit she'd never see coming and she'd never forget. The next day, I accidentally left the dowry folder out on the kitchen island. I watched from the hallway as Margaret flipped through it, her eyes narrowing. "This is still incomplete," she muttered. "We need full transfer confirmation." I waited until she left the room, then added a tiny voice memo on my phone. "Pressuring for financial transfer prior to marriage. Time-stamped." It wasn't for court. It was for me, for the record, for the truth I'd been gaslit into doubting the first time around. Evan returned home later and asked about the folder. "Mom said you were being slow." I pretended to fumble. "Oh, I meant to finalize that today." He smiled, thinking he'd nudged me into compliance. "That's my girl." I kissed his cheek again. Every time I complied, I felt stronger. Not because I was being obedient, but because I was building the version of myself who would never again ask permission to breathe. That night, I used the scanner app to duplicate every page. Not just the dowry documents, but the prenup Margaret slipped in without explanation. I found the clause, buried in legal fluff that would have stripped me of rights to Evan's property, while locking in mine as family collateral. I stared at the line for a full minute. Then I smiled and whispered, "Not this time." The next morning, Margaret decided it was time for another lesson in how to be a proper wife. I let her lead me into the kitchen, where she pulled out a handwritten list labeled Rules for a Happy Household. She read each one like gospel. Always greet your husband first, no matter who else is present. Never contradict him in public. Meals should be prepared by the wife, unless illness prevents it. I sipped my tea and nodded at each absurd rule like a student in awe. "Thank you," I said when she was done. "I know this will help me be better." Her eyes glittered with pride. "You're learning." I wanted her to believe that. I wanted her so confident in my submission that she didn't notice the quiet distancing I was enacting behind her back. That evening, while she watched a drama in the living room, I was emailing a private notary. I booked an appointment to withdraw from our joint property plan, which she had pushed me to sign under the guise of safety for Evan. I was also preparing a short letter addressed to the wedding committee, signed, dated, and stamped, officially announcing a delay. I didn't plan to send it yet, but when I did, it would arrive not with emotion, but with closure. Everything she thought I'd give her, I'd take back, calmly, elegantly, and by the time she realized it, the only thing left in her control would be her regret. Evan remained blissfully unaware. He was busy rehearsing a surprise speech for the wedding, something he had insisted on writing himself. I found the draft on his desk, a glowing tribute to his mother, not me. My mom raised me to be strong, and I know she's passing that wisdom to my bride, one line read. I stared at it for a long time. There wasn't a single sentence about love, not one about how we met, what I brought to his life, or even a thank you. It was all about her, and suddenly, everything made sense. I wasn't marrying Evan. I was marrying into Margaret's monarchy. I printed a copy of the speech and folded it into my journal, not as a keepsake, but as proof that this wasn't about a misunderstanding or cultural differences. It was about erasure. Margaret didn't want a daughter-in-law. She wanted a loyal subject. And Evan wasn't a victim. He was her soldier. That night, I stared at the ceiling, hands folded over my chest, and asked myself the question I had been avoiding. Do you want this life? The answer came quicker than expected. No, not even close. And that clarity? It tasted like freedom. I didn't cancel the wedding right away. I needed time to finish the final stage, taking back my name. Margaret had subtly insisted that I hyphenate my last name after marriage. It's a family tradition, she had said, smiling tightly, and your surname is difficult to pronounce anyway. I had agreed at the time, eager to keep peace. But this time, I filed a quiet motion to reclaim sole legal rights to my full name across all official documents, including bank records and contracts tied to the venue. When the coordinator called to confirm the bride's registered identity, I corrected them with my name. No hyphen, no addition. Oh, she said. We were told otherwise. That was a mistake, I replied. I'll be signing everything, in my name, alone. She hesitated, then added, Of course. I hung up, smiling. Margaret had done everything to carve me into her mold, but names have power, and taking mine back wasn't just symbolic, it was reclamation. I no longer wanted to be Mrs. Anything. I wanted to be me again, and piece by piece I was becoming her. Not the girl who flinched, not the bride who begged, but the woman who could walk away from a crown if it cost her her voice. The final piece fell into place on the night of the rehearsal dinner. Evan stood in the center of the room, glass raised, surrounded by his old college friends and Margaret's bridge club. He toasted his mother again, twice, Never once did he toast me. And to the woman who taught me everything, he said, eyes glassy from champagne, Mom, I owe you my future. I smiled for the cameras. Let him have his moment. I wore the guillaume pearls Margaret insisted I wear, and let her brag about choosing my dress. Every compliment passed through her. Didn't she look lovely? Someone asked. Of course, Margaret replied. We tailored it to suit her better. It needed work. Everyone laughed. Evan didn't flinch. That's when I knew, truly, that my choice was the right one. Because love shouldn't make you invisible. Love shouldn't sound like silence and feel like a stage where someone else steals your light. I looked around that room filled with people who thought they were celebrating me, but were really only admiring her performance. And in that moment, I decided they could keep their play. I was writing a new script, one where I starred in my own story, and it didn't begin in chains. It began in the moment I let go. The morning of the wedding, I woke before the sun. The house was silent. Margaret had finally gone to sleep after barking orders until midnight about flower arrangements and who should sit at respectable tables. I stood by the window in my silk robe, watching the sky fade from deep blue to lavender, and made my final decision, not out of emotion, but out of certainty. I didn't want to run away in tears. I wanted to walk away in peace. At 6 a.m., I packed my things, just enough for the weekend. No need for the dress Margaret forced on me. That stayed behind, right where it belonged, with her. I folded a note and left it on Evan's nightstand. Not dramatic, just honest. I cannot marry into a family that never made space for me. I've reclaimed my life. Please don't chase me. I won't look back. By 7 a.m., I was gone. The driver I hired took me to a quiet cabin Rachel had reserved. No internet, no phone calls, just quiet, just breath. As we pulled away from the house, I didn't cry, I didn't shake, I exhaled. For the first time in a year, I was no longer a role in someone else's show. I was me, and I was finally free. Word spread quickly. By noon, my phone, silent in airplane mode, had exploded with missed calls and messages. Evan, Margaret, a flurry of relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. Apologies, accusations. Some begged me to reconsider, others demanded explanations. But I owed them none. Margaret sent a message that read, "You're ruining his life for no reason." That was all I needed to see. Even now, she couldn't comprehend that the life she built for him wasn't the one I wanted. That silence wasn't peace. That submission wasn't love. I turned the phone off. Again. Sat at the wooden kitchen table of the cabin, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. I opened my journal and wrote, "You did not leave a man. You left a system." And it was true. Evan could have stood beside me. He could have chosen love over control. But he didn't. And Margaret? She could have welcomed me. Instead, she tried to mold me. And now, she was holding the ruins of her plans with no one left to blame but herself. And for once, I wasn't the one cleaning up the pieces. I was simply watching from a distance, with clarity and without regret. 2 weeks later, I started my new job with Rachel's firm. The onboarding call felt like stepping into sunlight after years in a windowless room. My name appeared on official documents without modification. My ideas were heard without being filtered. I spoke freely, laughed naturally, and didn't have to check the temperature of a room to feel safe. Meanwhile, word reached me that Evan had postponed the wedding indefinitely. Some articles speculated I'd had a breakdown. Others tried to paint him as a jilted, heartbroken groom. But no one knew the real story, because I didn't give interviews. I didn't post cryptic quotes. I didn't leak anything. I let the silence speak for itself. My absence told the truth louder than a scandal ever could. Evan tried calling again. I didn't answer. Margaret tried sending flowers. I donated them. I wasn't angry. I was just done. And that kind of peace? It doesn't come with applause. It comes with walking into your own future so fully that you forget who you ever had to shrink for in the first place. And then came the moment that turned everything full circle. An invitation. A gala, honoring female leaders in emerging industries. And I'd been selected to give the keynote. I accepted. Not for revenge, but for the woman I had once been. The one who sat through Margaret's rules and Evan's silences. The one who thought being loved meant being quiet. I walked into that ballroom with my hair pinned how I liked it, in a crimson dress Margaret would have deemed too loud, and heels that made me taller than Evan ever liked. And I stood on that stage, not as someone's almost wife, not as someone's shameful runaway, but as myself, fully, publicly, without permission. I opened my speech with a single sentence. The best vows you'll ever make are the ones you keep with yourself. The room froze, then erupted. I smiled. Somewhere out there they were watching, and that time, I didn't care. Because I hadn't just walked away from a wedding. I had walked into myself. After the gala, my inbox overflowed with invitations, interviews, partnership offers. Women reached out privately, some strangers, some old friends I hadn't heard from in years. I saw your speech, they wrote. I needed it. One woman said she canceled her wedding after watching the replay. Another said she finally had the courage to confront her in-laws. But I wasn't trying to be anyone's inspiration. I was just living. Loudly, finally. Margaret and Evan. I didn't hear from them again directly, but I heard whispers. His business had slowed. The vendors canceled without refunds. Margaret's pride, once so immovable, had turned brittle under the weight of public curiosity. They tried to keep the story quiet, tried to reframe it. Creative differences, Evan called it. Emotional instability, Margaret suggested. But no one bought it. Because when people saw the new version of me, the one who wasn't filtered through their narrative, they recognized who the real problem had been all along. And I didn't have to defend myself. I had already become the defense. A life lived boldly is the loudest rebuttal there is. I no longer needed people to believe me. I just needed them to see me. And now, they did. Months passed. I moved cities. Started over in a quiet apartment with sunlight in every room and no voices demanding how I should fold towels or speak at the dinner table. The peace was so unfamiliar it felt suspicious at first, like I was waiting for someone to scold me for enjoying it. But no one did. I went to brunch with friends again. I wore red lipstick without checking the mirror twice. I slept with the windows open and danced barefoot on wooden floors while my pasta overboiled. I was no longer measured by what I gave or what I tolerated. I was simply existing. Fully. And in that space, love found me. Not the possessive kind that demands proof, but the gentle kind that listens and doesn't try to rearrange you. His name was Thomas. We met at a conference. He shook my hand and didn't look past me. He didn't try to fix me. He asked questions. He remembered details. He laughed with his whole face, and when he learned about my past, he didn't flinch. He said, "I'm glad you left." That's all. Not pity, not curiosity, just support. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't healing for love. I had healed so I could recognize real love when it came. Our relationship wasn't flashy. There were no performative gestures, no posts, curated for likes, just consistency, just comfort. We built slowly, intentionally. When he first met my parents, he brought my mom flowers without me asking. When I hosted friends, he cooked with me. Not because he wanted praise, but because that's who he was. He didn't expect a servant. He wanted a partner. The more time passed, the more I realized how abnormal my old life had been, how love had once meant obedience. How I used to fear mistakes because Margaret weaponized every one of them. Now I was allowed to be messy, to be brilliant and tired, to succeed and fail without judgment. And when Thomas asked me to marry, he didn't bring his mother's ring. He brought mine, one we chose together. In a store where I tried on every style without shame, I said yes. Not because I needed to be rescued, but because I finally knew how to stand on my own. And when someone stands beside you by choice, not by control, that's love. Real love. We planned a small wedding. Just family. Just friends. No politics. No traditions forced into corners where they didn't belong. I didn't want lace if I didn't choose it. I didn't want customs designed to test a bride's humility. I wanted joy. I wanted warmth. I chose a garden venue with climbing roses and open air. My mother picked her own dress. My father walked me down the aisle, not because he had to, but because I asked him to. And I wore red lipstick. Bold, unapologetic, the shade Margaret had once called too loud for a bride. The morning of the wedding, I received a message request on social media. From her, Margaret. No subject line, just one line of text. I hope you're happy now. I stared at the screen, took a deep breath, and deleted the message without replying. Because happiness doesn't need validation from those who tried to bury you. It needs peace. And peace doesn't speak to ghosts. It simply moves forward, uninterrupted. But the real surprise came an hour before the ceremony. A staff member at the venue approached, nervous. "There's a woman at the gate. Says she's the groom's mother." I blinked. "He didn't tell you she was coming?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, not my groom's mother." My stomach turned. I walked toward the entrance slowly. And there she was, Margaret. Dressed in beige, pearls at her throat, eyes tired but calculating. She looked smaller, deflated, still trying to maintain the dignity of a woman who once commanded rooms, but now barely owned her shadow. "I needed to see you," she said. "Please." I didn't speak. Not yet. I waited. She hesitated, then whispered, "I was wrong." I tilted my head, unsure what she was playing at. "I wanted control," she continued. "I thought I was protecting him. But I was destroying everything." Then she did something I never imagined. She dropped to her knees. Her voice broke. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know. I see it now." And for a moment, the world stood still. I looked down at Margaret, kneeling on the stone path, the sound of wind threading through rose leaves around us. There was a time when this would have cracked me open, when her apology, even half-hearted, would have left me shaking, scrambling for closure. But not now. I saw her, not as a villain, but as a woman so consumed by control, she mistook fear for love. I didn't lift her up. I didn't offer forgiveness. I didn't need to. "I accept that you've seen the truth," I said softly, "but I no longer need to carry your apology. You handed me silence for years. I found my voice without your permission. I don't need your regret. I have my freedom." Her eyes filled, but I didn't console her. This moment wasn't about healing her. It was about releasing me. I turned, away, heels clicking softly on the stone, as guests rose in the distance. I walked into the garden, where my name hadn't been rewritten, where my love hadn't been bartered. Margaret stayed where she was. I never looked back. That was her ending, to hold. Mine was waiting at the altar, with a man who never asked me to bow. Thomas stood beneath the arch, eyes on mine, steady and soft. When I reached him, he didn't say, "You look beautiful," Though I did. He said, "You look like yourself." I smiled, hands in his. The vows we exchanged weren't about roles or rules. They were about respect, partnership, truth. "I won't complete you," he said, "because you are already whole, but I'll stand beside you in everything." And I, in turn, promised that I would never shrink to fit beside anyone ever again. That love, to me, meant being seen clearly, and still chosen. When we kissed, the world didn't erupt in noise. It quieted. Like the universe had paused for a beat, just to witness the redemption of a woman who'd once been told to speak softly, sit properly, and dress like she wasn't trying to be noticed. But now, I was noticed. Not because I was loud, but because I was undeniable. After the ceremony, people danced beneath lanterns and stars. Laughter bloomed in corners. My mother hugged me tight, whispering, "This is who you were always meant to be." And maybe that was the real rebirth. Not just returning to who I was before Margaret and Evan tried to erase me, but becoming something new. Stronger. Calmer. Sharper. There was no anger left in me. No bitterness. Just clarity. I danced barefoot, this time by choice, with red lipstick smudged from kisses I actually wanted. I wasn't proving anything to anyone. I was living. Finally. Margaret never reappeared, and I didn't ask where she went. I had no space left in my story for people who only knew how to control chapters, not honor them. We didn't post photos immediately. We didn't need to. Our marriage wasn't performance. It was sanctuary. And in that quiet, sacred joy, I began building something that would outlive the pain. A mentorship program for women silenced by tradition. A scholarship in my grandmother's name. For girls told they were too loud, too bold, too much. Each letter I received reminded me that freedom isn't just something you feel. It's something you pass on. That was the legacy I was building now. Not revenge, not victory laps, just light. A woman once told to dim herself, now walking, so brightly others could see their own path. Some nights, I still dream of the old house, the one where I sat in silence while Margaret corrected my posture and Evan glanced at me like I was something he'd outgrown. In the dream, I'm walking through the halls, but every room is empty. The furniture remains, but the air is cold. My old self waits there sometimes. Smaller, quieter, unsure if she's allowed to leave. But I always find her. I take her hand, lead her to the door, and we walk into the sun together. I wake up in a bed I chose with a man who doesn't just love me, he respects me, and that's when I smile. Not because I escaped, but because I never let what they did to me define what I became. Some people call that healing. I call it clarity. Margaret tried to shape me. Evan tried to manage me, but I learned the most important truth of all. Being misunderstood by the wrong people is a small price to pay for being deeply known by the right ones. And now, I am known, not for what I endured, but for how I rose, without begging, without noise, just one quiet decision at a time. It wasn't the grand speeches that changed everything. It was the quiet, steady refusal to shrink. Every time I chose myself in small moments, when I walked away from their expectations, when I closed my door, when I signed my name exactly how I wanted, it rewrote something inside me. I used to think leaving meant failure, but now I know. Leaving isn't quitting. It's choosing peace over performance. It's realizing that staying loyal to people who ask you to disappear isn't noble. It's dangerous. When I left Evan and Margaret behind, I wasn't running. I was returning to myself. And with every step, I began to remember what I sounded like when I spoke without fear, what I looked like when I didn't brace for judgment, what it felt like to exist without editing. That's the kind of freedom no one gives you. You have to claim it. And once you do, there's no going back. Not because you hate who you used to be, but because you love who you are now too much to ever let her be silenced again. Thomas and I never made vows about perfection. We knew better. What we promised was honesty, softness, and space. Space to grow. Space to fall and still be held. We make mistakes. We talk through them. We check in often. Not because we're insecure, but because we're invested. And every time we do, I'm reminded why I walked away from a man who claimed to love me, but never once defended me. A man who called me too sensitive, instead of asking why I was hurt. A man who let his mother tear me down brick by brick and still expected me to smile for the photos. I look at Thomas sometimes and think, this is what safety feels like. Not silence, not obedience, but being seen fully and loved anyway. That's a kind of wealth Margaret could never buy. A kind of legacy Evan will never touch. And I don't feel superior. I just feel grateful. Because the woman I am now owes her freedom not just to the escape, but to the fire she walked through, to find it. Sometimes I imagine what Margaret tells people now. Maybe she paints herself as a misunderstood matriarch. Maybe she calls me ungrateful. Maybe she pretends she always supported me. I don't know. I don't follow her life. I don't ask about Evan either. I let them live in the distance, blurry and faded like an old photograph I no longer need. The power they once had over me is gone. Not because they apologized, but because I no longer believe in the version of myself they created. That girl, the quiet bride who let herself be steamrolled for the sake of tradition, deserves more than pity. She deserves honor. Because without her, I never would have reached the clarity that fuels me now. I honor her every time I say no. Every time I say yes to things that scare me. Every time I protect my boundaries without guilt. She was the seed. I'm the bloom. And the bloom no longer looks for sunlight from people who only ever offered shade. The Yahtzee anniversary of the wedding that never was came and went. I didn't mark it with sadness. I marked it with gratitude. I took the day off, cooked my favorite meal, and wrote a letter. Not to send, just to say everything aloud one last time. I wrote to the girl who nearly married a man who never protected her. I thanked her for walking away, for trusting her gut, for not settling for a love that demanded her silence as proof of loyalty. I told her she did the bravest thing a woman can do, not leave a man, but leave a version of herself that no longer fit. That night, Thomas came home with a bouquet of peonies, my favorite, and kissed my forehead without needing a reason. I just wanted to celebrate you, he said. And I smiled, knowing this was the life I almost gave up for the illusion of belonging. This soft, steady joy was what I had created with my own hands, my own voice, and my own no. We framed a photo from the wedding. Not of us kissing or cutting cake, but of me standing alone in the garden before guests arrived. Hair curled, head lifted, red lips, calm eyes. It was Thomas's idea. You should see what we all see, he said. Strength, peace, autonomy. Not a bride being handed over, but a woman walking forward. I hung it by the front door, and every morning when I leave for work, I glance at it. It reminds me that every time I chose silence over screaming, every time I picked strategy over spectacle, I was not being weak. I was building something bigger, something lasting. The kind of life no one could take from me because I didn't inherit it. I built it, from the ground up, with no blueprint but my own. I didn't need to humiliate anyone to heal. I didn't need to break Margaret to rise. The world took care of that. Time always reveals what pride hides. And the most powerful closure isn't watching someone suffer. It's realizing they don't matter to your joy anymore, Evan could have been my husband, but I would have spent my life wondering when I was finally enough for him to say, "Stop, that's my wife." Thomas never had to be taught how to protect me. He arrived already knowing love doesn't dominate, it defends. And I arrived at this life not by chance, not by luck, but by choosing to walk away from what didn't see me. That's the part people forget. Walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. If Margaret ever tells the story her way, that I was dramatic, ungrateful, disloyal, let her. If Evan says I was cold, hard, impossible to please, let him. Because I'm not their story anymore. I am my own, and I don't need applause to know I won. I stood at the altar once, then walked away. And now, I walk forward every day. Loved, free, and never looking back.